All right, welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Condensing Your Course for Shorter Terms, preparing for summer 2021. My name is Lydia Treadwell, and I am a Senior Learning Experience Designer with LSU Online, and I'm joined by my co-host. Lynn, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am Lynn Namens, and I'm also a Senior Learning Experience Designer with LSU Online.
If you're not familiar with LSU Online's design and development team, we are a service and support division for LSU faculty. For LSU Online, we partner closely with faculty to design high quality learning experiences that incorporate instructional design, user experience, and other design principles. But we also facilitate many of these faculty professional development workshops to try to provide support and guidance for the faculty who are designing, redesigning, and teaching courses for blended or online delivery or face-to-face in this case. So before we really, get into the meat and potatoes of this, let's have kind of a frank introduction. So if you're joining us today, it's probably because you're teaching over the summer, which is the first time that LSU will be offering 2 adjacent 5-week terms. And this is the shortest amount of time that the summer term has been. This includes campus offerings as well as LSU Online. And so as you know, summer terms previously were abbreviated to a shorter amount of time. But this even shorter 5-week duration is going to present some challenges, I know, especially for faculty, and will be challenging for students to adjust as well. So I just want to reiterate, we're in this together. We're going to give you some strategies that may help you wrap your mind around the severely reduced amount of time that you have for your courses this summer. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get into the presentation. If you have any questions as we go through the session, you can put them in the chat. We have our colleague, Megan McClure, who will be monitoring the chat, and we'll try to address them as soon as we can. If we have any questions that we don't get to over the course of the presentation, we'll send a follow-up email. And then as we go through, just make sure you're muted for the majority of the presentation to cut down on disruptions, though we will have a couple of points where we do want you to unmute and speak up. So without further ado, I launched that poll earlier, and I just wanted to get a sense for what our major, who our participants are today. So it looks like I'm having trouble pulling up the poll. There we go. So I'm going to end polling. So it looks like there's nobody here who is going to be teaching fully face-to-face. Most of you are either teaching in the fully online synchronous format where you may have regular Zoom meetings, and then many of you will be fully online and asynchronous, which is great news because we have strategies for both. So because we like to practice what we preach, let's start by previewing the outcomes for this workshop. So by the end of this workshop, we want you to be able to prioritize your course content and make optimal use of the course duration to make sure that you're still meeting those credit hour requirements and student engagement time. We also want you to make thoughtful and intentional adjustments to your course content. This involves the instructional material and activities to ensure alignment with your course outcomes. And then finally, we'll discuss some strategies to facilitate short-term courses to set yourself and your students up for success. So as you are working to condense your course to the new 5-week term, keep in mind that accelerated courses require the same credit and student engagement hours regardless of course duration. I know I've heard many students say, oh, I'll take that course in the summer, it'll be easier, because they assume that because of the shorter duration, it'll be watered down. But the reality is that for faculty, for you, as you're condensing the course, you're just gonna have to change your pacing, structure, and maybe make some small adjustments to your assessments to meet this new duration. And then for students, there's gonna be in this case, a 3 times increase in the in-class and out-of-class time required per week that they would normally do for a 15-week course for this summer course. And most of the students are taking only 1 or 2 courses over the summer, so they do have the time to dedicate to really focus in on the 1 or 2 courses that they're taking, but it's still going to be a challenge for them. So just remember that for a 3-credit-hour course, student engagement and study time should total 135 hours. And in this workshop, we're going to dig in a little bit more into what that means and what that looks like, but just keep this number in mind because it will help you plan your instruction. So for a 5-week course, if it's 135 hours total, if we're breaking it up by week, that means 27 hours students are spending both in class and out of class working on that course. We'll look at a strategy and a tool that you can use to calculate and make sure that you're on track to meet this requirement or this target goal of hours. Another thing, we want to make sure that the courses are also still meeting the academic engagement activity requirement. This means that students are submitting an academic activity by the census date, which is usually on or before the 5th day of the term, which is what financial aid uses to verify that students are actively participating in the course. So we have this on the census date as well as the last day of the class. So just keep those things in mind. Those are still requirements that regardless of the 5-week term, your course is still going to have to meet. But the major question we want to focus on today is how do we condense course content effectively while also maintaining the rigor and student engagement time? So how are we going to do this? So when we were conceiving of this workshop, we really wanted to think about it in 2 different phases. So phase 1 is what we're in now. We're trying to plan for how we're going to condense our course materials into this 5-week term. Or, not necessarily for 5 weeks, it could be for a 7-week term or a 10-week term. We're going to focus on some strategies for that first planning phase of preparing for the summer. And then we're going to provide some tips and strategies for when you're actually facilitating the course within the 5-week term. So I'll turn it over to Lynn. She's going to start reviewing our first tips for condensing your course materials.
Thank you, Lydia. So the first strategy we want to focus on is just to take a step back and inventory your course. See what you have, take a look at it, and look at it in the lens of your learning outcomes. Because from then it's going to help you determine what information is essential to mastering those outcomes. Like Lydia said, those course learning goals, those are the same regardless of if your course is 15 weeks, 8 weeks, or 5 weeks. Those are not negotiable. So this activity is something that should be done and can be done for any type of course, whether it is that 15-week or that 8-week or shorter term. We use an alignment map, which is kind of a course blueprint that allows us to see those connections to make sure that everything is in service of those course learning goals. But it will also help you guide your decisions on how you'll handle those other course components, your assessments, materials, and activities. So it's really all about making sure that everything in your course is intentional and purposeful. And for this shorter term, that everything is critical to the mastery of those learning outcomes. So like I said, it's going to help you plan out how your course is going to look and feel. It'll also help you pace it out in terms of that course schedule. So we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into each of these areas as we move through this first section of the workshop. But as you start looking at your course and your course topics, maybe ask yourself, are there opportunities to combine natural themes within the curriculum? If you're teaching a standard 15-week course, do I spend 2 weeks on a certain topic or 3 weeks on a certain topic? That's an opportunity for you to combine and kind of condense those materials and streamline that content into a more condensed form. We'll also ask you to take an inventory of your assessments, not only the type of assessments you're doing, but also the number of them. Because remember, you as the instructor only have 5 weeks to teach this as well, right? So if you, for example, normally do chapter quizzes that go along with your textbook, consider combining those into a single larger thematic quiz based on those combined concepts. And instead of doing, say, a book review where students are taking, 4 weeks to even read a book and then to do a critical analysis of it, can we convert that into maybe doing critical analyses of shorter readings, journal articles, news articles, that type of thing. So as long as you're assessing the same competencies, you do have some flexibility in your assessment strategy for changing up the number and the type of assessments that you do. And we've already mentioned that the pace of the course is going to be rather intense for the 5-week term. So you may need to rethink some of those teaching strategies that you traditionally use. So consider setting up a framework that allows students to engage in those conceptual topics before they come to class. So maybe do some of those readings or watching some videos. You may be familiar with the term flipped classroom, where you spend that time before class kind of going through the materials and spend your class time with students on that application and discussion. So especially in that synchronous live session, you can absolutely do that, especially with those live sessions that you'll have via Zoom. For the fully asynchronous ones, that may mean kind of condensing down some of your summary notes or really taking a look at what might be a must know versus a nice to know kind of topic. So you want to focus in on what is truly critical and prioritize those topics and make sure that those are aligned to those course outcomes. So again, one strategy that we use is an alignment map, which is just a visual way to see how course components are tied and related to each other, but also to make sure that they are in service of those learning outcomes. So as you can see here along the top, we have a row for those course outcomes. And then we have columns for your instructional materials and activities and assessments. And we have some instructional language on there. We will give you a copy of this alignment map, probably not the colorful one you see here, but you'll get it so you kind of know how to fill it out and whatnot. But let's take a look at an example. So this is a sample alignment map for a poli-sci course. They are, for this module specifically, looking at 2 course outcomes in relation to civil liberties and civil rights. And so the instructor has listed out the different materials. They're reading the textbook. He's got some written content in the Moodle book. He's also using some video, and you'll see that after the end of each of these materials, we have it coded to what is being supported. So the chapters 3 and 4 reading of the textbook, that is directly related to supporting that first course outcome. The far right column is for the activities and assessments. So this tells us how we are assessing those course outcomes and making sure that everything is intentional and actually is in service of mastering those goals. So again, he's got some auto-graded activities in there in terms of a quiz. He's offering a forum for a discussion, and then there's a segregation assignment, which could easily be turned into a group project for that shortened condensed term. So if you are interested in learning more about alignment and doing this from the ground up as you start developing courses or redeveloping courses, we do offer a workshop called Design to Align. It's offered 6 times a year. And I encourage you to join us for one of our upcoming sessions, which the next one is April 21st. So just give us a little plug there. Lydia, I'm going to hand it back to you, and you are on mute.
All right. So once you have inventoried your major course components, potentially using an alignment map, I would strongly recommend using an alignment map. You may need to then reorganize or distribute your lectures and modules accordingly. And we strongly recommend adopting what we call a modular format. In that you're chunking your content into modules. And a module is a unit of learning that is not bound by time, but by topic. And modules are what we use at LSU Online to help instructors take what would normally be a 15-week course and redistribute those 15 weeks into a 7-module, 8-week course. So as you are reorganizing your weekly content, try to look for areas of overlap and combine themes of content into modules, and then arrange your course schedule by the length of your term. So if you're looking at your 15-week course and maybe you cover one topic per week, try to combine those topics into those major themes, those major units that make sense together. So on the left, we have that 15-week course, and on the right, they've redistributed it into 3 modules per 3 topics per module, which is 5 modules total. So that would be about a week per module for a 5-week term. So let's take a look a little bit at a more specific example. So this is an example from a poli-sci course that was redeveloped for LSU Online. And the instructor originally organized his course by weeks, but when he had to condense his course for an 8-week term, he used those natural themes to combine his topics into modules. So you can see, each week covers, one topic, and then when he reorganized those into the 7 modules, they cover a few more topics, but they're in those same major themes. So remember, a module is simply a unit of learning. Don't think of it as a single week, but if you have 5 modules in a 5-week term, it is going to be about a week per module, but it doesn't have to be a 5 module structure for a 5-week term. So if this instructor were to condense this course into a 5-week term, each module of the 7 modules could be allocated 5 days. So that would work out timing wise to where they could go through 7 modules in a 5-week term, and he wouldn't have to reduce the number of modules to 5 in order for it to fit. So they can still fit those natural themes without having to cut a module away or recombine modules into a theme that wouldn't really make sense. It wouldn't make sense to put policies and branches of government together to meet that 5-module 5-week term. He could also use this same 7-module structure for his 15-week course. So once you make these changes, once you've kind of reallocated your topics into modules, it does make it a little bit easier for you to pivot and offer the course for different lengths of terms. So for the 7-module course, each module would take about 2 weeks in a 15-week term. So as you're thinking about your 5-week term, think about your course content in terms of modules. Don't try to make it fit, okay, what can I cover week 1 through week 5 that's going to make it time out right? Instead, look at those modules, reallocate in terms of natural themes, and then you can be flexible about how much time it takes a student to get through a module. So for a 5-week term, each module could be 5 days with 7 modules, or it could be 5 days per module for a 7-module course. There's a lot of different numbers. Again, I would recommend just looking at those natural themes, breaking it into modules, and then that gives you the freedom to structure your course schedule to meet whatever term it is being offered. So one thing that we offer to any LSU faculty is our 7-module course template. This will help you as you're transitioning your course into this modular format. We've provided a lot of placeholders, a lot of how-tos, instructional language to set your course up to be consistent across each module, and have some features that will make it more organized for you as you're conceiving of this new modular structure, and then more organized for students so that they know where things are going to be from module to module. We have things like a place to put course outcomes, a module checklist, and other information that will help you and your students keep everything organized. And we'll provide a link in the follow-up email to this workshop where you can request a copy of this course template.
All right, so because at LSU Online, we take a backwards approach to designing those courses, it means that, again, we've established our learning outcomes. And now that we've kind of looked at our content, we've looked at those natural themes, we should have a sense of how the course will be outlined. So the next step is to focus on the assessments and the activities, because we want to make sure that we have things in place, those mechanisms that allow students to demonstrate the understanding of that material and mastery of those learning goals. So it's especially important to revisit these activities and assessments for the 5-week term. And ideally, if you do choose to use the alignment map activity, you've already identified which components are critical to those learning outcomes. Because again, every activity and assessment must align back to those required learning goals. So the question you're probably asking yourself at this point is, okay, how do I fit all of the work that students do in 15 weeks into 5 weeks while making sure they're demonstrating those same competencies, right? And the key word here is competency. We want you to focus on the knowledge and skills and abilities that students demonstrate by the end of the course. And once you've identified which activities allow for that demonstration, then you can think about how you can condense and reformat those activities. Like I mentioned before, you might think about consolidating chapter quizzes into that larger thematic or module quiz. And you can use things like Panopto or H5P, both of which are available in Moodle, to create knowledge checks through your materials or interactive videos with stopping points to ask them a question about something they just watched or predict what might happen next. So auto-graded activities like these are really beneficial for the students because it gives them instant feedback and alerts them of their progress of, am I on track, or do I really need to study concept X a little bit more in depth? It also allows you to monitor your class's progress. In the event you need to pivot and provide additional support and resources or supplemental materials, that helps them get kind of back on track, and you can use it as an intervention tool. So if you have a final large project that has multiple phases, typically a lot of them do, you might consider breaking that project into phases or stages, such as a topic proposal, a first draft, et cetera. And it allows students to stay on track for that larger project if you have dedicated deliverables points for them, so that they're not trying to cram everything in the night before. I'm not saying students do that, but it's a possibility. And it also allows them to get some feedback either from you or even better from peer reviews or having some open class time to discuss, maybe utilize those breakout rooms in Zoom to allow those little groups to work together and have discussions. So breaking down that larger assessment will really help students improve each portion of that project and keep them on track for creating or completing that larger project. It may also make grading easier on you, since you'll be grading a revised draft instead of that first run of a final project that students might put together at the last minute. On the flip side, instead of breaking down a large project, you could consider combining similar assignments if they assess the same competency. For example, in a 15-week course, students may write 6 one-page analyses of primary sources. In a 5-week course, you might reduce these to like 2 or 3 papers, or turn one of them into a class discussion or a debate. Keep in mind that this reduction of activities needs to still assess the same outcomes, right? We're not dropping an activity that doesn't assess a course outcome. All of the outcomes still need to be assessed. In terms of class discussion and debates, you might think of using an active learning strategy like think, pair, share, which allows students to think about their response, pair up with another student, and share their own opinions and thoughts. That allows every student to have a voice in the course without having to speak in front of, the class at large, or if you have those students who are hesitant about public speaking and are kind of shy and timid and don't want to speak up, this is a way to do that in a more flexible, controlled way to do that.
And I think this is a, sorry, Lynn, to interrupt
you.
No,
go for it.
But I think, especially for a 5-week course, students need to develop a sense of community sooner rather than later. So having these group activities, students can find, a study buddy or a partner or just a friend in class that they can kind of slog through a very, very accelerated term together with. So I just wanted to emphasize that as well.
Yes. And I also want to re-emphasize that, again, you guys only have 5 weeks to grade everything and get through the course yourselves. So the types of activities and assessments that you use, be strategic and realistic in the amount of time that you have as well. So if you're using assignments, use a rubric. Not only does it set up the expectations for students on what your standard is, but it's also going to expedite your grading in Moodle, especially if you can quickly point and click the different criteria and then give overall individualized feedback at the end. You could also allow for group submissions, or if you are using breakout rooms in Zoom, or if you're using discussion forums in Moodle, have those students work in groups, come up, discuss together, and come up with a single submission for that prompt or for those questions. And that way you're not grading 50 forums every discussion forum. You might be, grading 10 of them. So think about different ways to allow students to take ownership in their learning, but be strategic in how you can grade them as well. So now that we have established our assessments and activities, the next step is to look at that course content, right? So again, the course content needs to be aligned to those course goals, and we need to make sure that it is there so that they can successfully pass whatever assessments that you have planned for them. So the coverage of the materials is important, but I want you to also think about the time it takes for students to get through those materials, right? So while it may be tempting to leave all of the assigned readings and things that you have in your normal 15-week course, in a 5-week term, there's just less time to get through those materials. And you may find as you're looking through what you have that some of the material covers the same concepts. Now, repetition is great for learning. It helps students gain that foundational knowledge that they need. It's helpful to see materials covered through different modalities, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Utilize your resources. There are wonderful TED Talks, podcasts, news articles, YouTube videos that may provide the same information, but in a more digestible format for those students. For a lot of people, it's easier to listen to or view a 15 to 30-minute lecture and take notes versus reading 100 pages of textbook or journal articles or something and try to take notes on each of those different topics. So if you can replace or convert some of your materials, then you can, provide your own creative video or hold a class session that kind of closes the gaps on those topics. So I encourage you to utilize what's out there, what's available to you, and use the LSU libraries. If you're not familiar with them, each college has at least one subject matter librarian who can help you locate or brainstorm additional or alternate materials. Keep in mind, however, that summer term is not that far away, and there's no guarantee that they have capacity or that they'll be able to, find everything you need in time. So definitely do your own research, but if you're going to seek assistance from them, do it early so that they do have time to help you out. And secondly, like I said, think about the different ways you can present material, but also have students review content before, how they review content before, during, and after class. Think about how you can get them engaged in the content. A lot of times people say you don't really know a topic until you have to teach it. And so get them involved in that content. Maybe let them be moderators or facilitators of a class discussion, or be a group leader and kind of monitor the discussions for a class. You could also provide questions before class that students must be prepared to discuss, and then do that partnership or assign groups to allow them to take collaborative notes. Like Lydia said, encourage study buddies. And so if you are not sure where to start, I do want to plug our designer in residence program to go for ideas. If you're not familiar with this program, there is a member of the LSU Online Design and Development team assigned to every college on campus who has a dedicated day specifically for that college for faculty to schedule appointments and meet with them and discuss course design and redesign things just like this. So definitely take advantage of them. But for now, we're going to move into an actual example of a course that kind of did this reconfiguration. So in this course, during the normal regular semester, the instructor has some written content. There's a textbook, so they read about 50 to 80 pages, in addition to 3 journal articles. All of the material covers basically the same concepts, but in these different forms, right? And the students are spending about 10 to 13 hours of reading this information between Monday and Wednesday. That's not a lot of time. And we'll talk about the 10 to 13 hours and how we calculate that in just a bit. But if they're doing all of this reading in 3 days for a regular semester, think about how much they would have to do in a 5-week term, right? When we're condensing that even further. So after taking some inventory, taking stock of their materials and what really is essential and what is that, kind of nice to know, the instructor has done this after structure on the right. So they're still doing textbook reading. They're still doing those 50 to 80 pages, but this instructor has given them the weekend to do it. The weekend kind of feels like bonus time to me, which may just be a personal feeling, but it allows the students to kind of come prepared for the traditional Monday is the first day of the week mentality, prepared and having read all of that stuff. Instead of those 3 assigned journal articles, the instructor has chosen to do a lecture video, which covers those same topics, and then has given additional supplemental articles for those that are passionate about that topic, may need additional support, or just need that information to expand on that lecture content. That supplemental article section, that's probably the nice to know. Absolutely benefits the course, but it may not be tied directly to those critical learning outcomes that students need to meet. So in total, students are spending about 9 to 11 hours, and they are focused on that vital information. So think about, how you can optimize that in-time class by giving them those readings ahead of time, maybe using some of that flipped classroom strategy of, get through the lecture materials before you come to class, and we'll spend class time on application, discussion, and pain points for students. And then part of kind of evening out the load for students is making things predictable for them. There's no time for students to be confused on what to do, when to do it, how to do it, et cetera. And like Lydia mentioned in our template, our Moodle template course, we do have placeholders for checklists that students can kind of go by. So we recommend using a regular cadence in every module for both your content and your activities. So we recommend that you do a review kind of session first, and then new information, and then application. So if I want to make an analogy, I'm going to use Netflix, but it could be any TV provider, right? So almost every TV show starts with previously on and gives that recap of, those major events that happened before. And they do this because it situates that current episode into the broader storyline, right? It makes those connections. So, oh, I forgot Dave died in episode 2 or whatever, but that's going to be important because it's coming up in this episode, right? So it's the same kind of concept here. We want to provide a recap for students or tie what they've learned previously to what they're about to learn. And this doesn't need to be huge or complicated. It could be a 2 to 3 minute video. It could be, you know, kind of an oral quiz at the beginning of class. I know Lydia has done that in her art class. Do you want to speak to that, Lydia?
Yeah, so especially when we think about the long weekends that they have sometimes, I would lecture Monday through Thursday, and then we would have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. And so Mondays, I would start out with a kind of low stakes pop quiz. And it was amazing how little they had retained from the previous week, and how just having that review at the beginning where they're forced to respond and see if they still remember, you know, it was a good starting point for that lecture, because oftentimes I would need to go back and do a little bit more of an extensive review, kind of after doing testing the waters to see what students had retained from the previous lecture. So I definitely recommend like checking in, finding some kind of way to assess very, very quickly where students are at week to week, or even lecture to lecture.
Yeah. And so after you've done that review, you kind of know where they're at. They know what's coming up next. Obviously present your new information and then end it off with an application activity. So that formative auto-graded quiz, discussion, etc. And then we also recommend that you have a regularly scheduled programming, if I'm going to keep with the TV theme here. So making sure that you follow the same due date. So, you know, make everything due at 11:59 p.m. Make all of your quizzes due on Thursdays. And these are not suggested dates. I just kind of pick them at random, but do what makes sense and then keep to that format. And then in part of that, you can also create a study plan for your students. This is an example of a study plan for Math 1022. This is a kind of an intense math course. And so they have created this kind of success plan for their students, which kind of goes through, you should be doing your preview, do your homework, take your quiz, this is how you do your exams, etc. And then within each of those things, they've gone even further and said, take the quiz, review the quiz, take it again, you know, all those different pieces that help students set themselves up for success. And then I want you to remember that your credit hours have not changed, right? We've talked a lot about reconfiguring, restructuring, kind of condensing, but your credit hours have not changed. That is a requirement. So as Lydia said, that target number for 3-credit course is 135 hours. And the way that is determined is your in-class time, where if we're looking at a traditional face-to-face course, that's butts in the seats time, right? That's literally the time they spend sitting in front of you, listening or not listening to your lectures, right? And then 90 hours of that roughly is your out of class time. So homework, projects, studying, etc. Now, these are estimates because every student is different. And there's, you know, I don't know for sure that Lydia is going to spend 5 hours studying for my exam. There's no way for me to really calculate that, but we can estimate it. So the tool that we use for estimating these things is a time on task calculator, or in this case, a workload estimator. At LSU Online, we use the Wake Forest estimator. I'm not going to go super in depth with this tool, but I will give you kind of the highlights. The first thing I want you to know is that this is based on science and research. So there is logic behind it. There's magical algorithms that happen on the back end, but this allows you to input the number of pages students are reading, the density. So how many pages, how many words on a page are there? The difficulty in terms of, is it no new concepts? Is it some new concepts? Is it all new concepts? Because depending on that difficulty, that's going to change the reading rate of students. You can input the number of pages and class discussions you're assigning, as well as the exams and your live class meetings, as well as any videos and things like that, and just random other assignments like projects and things like that. So I recommend doing this per module instead of just saying, I have 5 weeks and here's everything, right? Because we want to make sure that we are evening that load. We don't want a module that is severely overloaded on students, but also not that is like just super light and underloaded either. It should be kind of an even pace. So again, in a 5-week term, if you are using that 5-module structure, that's going to be about 27 hours per week. If you are using a structure that is 7 modules and just reconfiguring the pace a little bit, each of those modules in the 7-module structure would be about 19 to 20 hours. But remember, they're doing that within like 5 days. So there's lots of numbers, there's lots of things. If you're interested in the science of it, at the top of this page, there's a click here for estimation details that goes into their research, what they've looked at, and how they've kind of put all of this together. And if you are interested in actually doing this activity and aren't quite sure where to start or how to do it, that college designated designer in residence can walk you through using this calculator as well. So we are going to pause for questions. So we're going to see if we have any questions in the chat that we may have missed, but at this time, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or share your experiences in condensing course materials and any strategies that maybe we haven't mentioned. We'll have about 4 or 5 minutes for this period, unless y'all are, just really quiet and we've done an excellent job on our part.
I have a question about the estimated student time outside of class. If that's used for validation of course accreditation, like how are you collecting data to assure yourself that the students are doing that? That's my biggest challenge, is to make sure that they're doing their own work outside. I think it's less of an issue for 5 weeks because they don't have time for anything else.
Right. So at LSU Online, what we do is, like I said, we use that alignment map, and everything that we put into those online courses goes through this time on task calculator. And we record all of that data within our own alignment map so that we do have that information.
So do you collect data from students?
I see.
Showing that they're spending time outside of class.
Right. I really wish the analytics in Moodle were a little bit more dynamic than they are. Unfortunately, I believe, and I could be wrong, this might be a question for the FTC, but the logs that Moodle generates can tell me if a student clicked on a page. It cannot tell me how long they spent on that page. So there's no real way for me to gauge through Moodle how I could do that. Now, you could set up some self-reporting mechanisms if students wanted to share how much time they're spending in that information. But I don't know that we have anything that will kind of curate that information as of right now.
So fair enough, it's not a requirement on our part to do that.
The 45 hours is absolutely a requirement.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah. And I think we have some people in the chat chiming in on this conversation. So other universities include questions in their end of course evaluations asking how much time they've spent. So that's self-reporting strategy. Great question. Anything else anybody wants to share? We have about a minute before we need to move on.
Any additional LSU ADA support for making sure all the different reframing of materials is going to be LSU compliant?
Yeah, that is something to keep in mind. And also when you're looking for outside resources, making sure that you're abiding by copyright as well, right? So you do need to be aware of what you're bringing into your course and making sure that it is both ADA and copyright compliant. So if you're using, a YouTube video, making sure that it has captions. If you're using a podcast, does it have a transcript? If you are doing a PDF, is it, not a scan of a piece of paper, but is it searchable and things like that? So just like you would in a normal semester offering, any materials that you bring into the course do have to be compliant with ADA and copyright. All right, well, I'm going to hand it off to Lydia to continue phase 2 of this process.
All right, thanks, Lynn. So once you have planned and kind of wrapped your mind how you're going to deliver your course over the 5-week term in 5 modules, 7 modules, 10, I wouldn't recommend doing it in 10 modules. But now it's time to focus on some strategies for facilitating an accelerated course so that students aren't left behind and are more likely to succeed. So in the next section, we'll talk about some more student-centered strategies that will ensure that your students are kept in the loop about expectations. So the first one is to set clear goals and communicate expectations from day one. So this holds true for any course. This is by no means a groundbreaking tip that we're giving you, but I think this is especially important to keep in mind for this accelerated course. Students are going to need more frequent support since they are going through such a shortened term. But also remember that your students have signed on for this 5-week term. So it's important to impress on them what the next 5 weeks are going to be like. It's going to be intense and there's little room for error, but you as the instructor will be there to keep them on track by regularly communicating what they need to do, course updates, and expectations throughout the semester. So you can do this by sending maybe a very transparent welcome email where you can provide some more detailed information about the pacing and structure of your course and your own expectations about student engagement and participation so that they know that this is not going to be a watered down version of your course. This is going to be the same course just taught in 5 weeks. You could also even send out a welcome video so that they can start developing that relationship with you, especially if you're going to be teaching asynchronously online or synchronously online so that they can start getting to know you and getting to know your face. Additionally, you may also want to create a semester schedule for all of your coursework that has lectures that you're going to cover, topics you're going to cover, deadlines, homework, and consider sending that out pretty early on, maybe even before the semester starts, so that students can start wrapping their minds around what their workload is going to be. And maybe even communicating to them what the weekly hour requirement is going to be based on that time on task. So if we're, doing 4 one-hour lectures throughout the week, that then they should be spending even more time outside of class, reviewing the lectures, reviewing the materials, working on their assignments. So just a couple of examples of this in action. This is from that same accelerated summer math course. So the instructor created this calendar, which provides an at a glance of all of the major homeworks, quizzes, and the exams that they have for the entire semester. So we recommend creating something like this and maybe placing it in a central location in your course, and maybe even updating it regularly should the schedule shift around a little bit. This instructor also chose to create a short video where she provided tips for success. So maybe some more detailed information about what students can do before, during, and after class to be more successful in what is usually a very challenging course. Again, I'll plug the 7 module template that you can request for your own course. This provides a couple of different places where you can set up a visible schedule. It provides a module checklist so that students can go through each of the items and make sure that they have done everything that they need to do to successfully complete that module. So second tip, again, nothing new, but provide detailed instructions and timely feedback. So again, another no-brainer. But especially if your course features a large final project, multiple written assignments, or has a heavy research component, it's really, really good to show students what is going to be required to complete those early on. I've seen a lot of instructors that will mention these larger projects in the syllabus, but not reveal full details until later in the semester. We recommend that you make all of those instructions available to students at the very beginning so that they can start planning their time, start seeing what all is involved in completing that project, and bringing it up regularly, especially if you're meeting synchronously at some point during the week, talking to students, okay, remember your final project is only 2 weeks away, so start thinking about X, Y, and Z. And then when you're writing those instructions, try to be as clear as possible because the more specificity and clarity you give in those instructions, hopefully the less questions that you get as students are working through the project. And then hopefully you get a better output from students because you know, they knew all of the things that you were expecting, all of the criteria that they were going to be graded on. So this could include maybe creating another short video overview. You could even potentially, depending on, you know, the subject or the example that you use, you could do a short video where you're going through an example of a project that a previous student submitted. Now, of course, you would want to make sure that you hide any identifying markers of that student's name, and maybe even get permission from that student to share. Usually they're okay with you sharing their great exemplar project. But it's really, really helpful for students to see a model of whatever that project is going to be. Now, this may not be appropriate for the level of course, so you may not want to show them an example, but maybe walk them through how they could get started or how they could finish out to meet all of the requirements that you've outlined. You also want to include a purpose statement. Why are they doing this project? Why are they writing this paper? How is this connected to outcomes? So again, tying it back to your major goals for the course, which is their learning outcomes. So you also want to be providing individualized and timely feedback. So not only on these larger projects, but any assignments or quizzes that they have throughout the course. We recommend that the turnaround time for grading be about 1 to 2 business days. And this seems like, you know, maybe a tall order, especially if you have a larger class, to turn around all of these assignments or all of these quizzes. But I'll talk about a couple of ways that you can save yourself some time in setting up mechanisms for giving individualized and timely feedback. But remember that the reason why we want to give this feedback so quickly is that since this is an accelerated term, students don't have a lot of time to course correct. So if they do really poorly on one of the first assignments and they don't get feedback from you for another week, they probably have already had another assignment due and didn't know what they needed to adjust in between now and then. So it's really, really important to be mindful of this quick turnaround time for grading. So some different ways that you can build in some easier, more streamlined ways to provide consistent feedback. Moodle has 2 different tools for assessing grades, which is the grading rubric and the grading guide. Both of these make it more transparent for students. They see the exact criteria and levels of achievement that they're going to be graded on. And then you, in turn, once they submit this, use the grading rubric or grading guide to assess them on these different areas. So it makes it a lot more transparent for them. They see where they got points off. And you know, you are being consistent by assessing all of the students on the same level of criteria. Additionally, the grading guide allows for you to save frequently used feedback comments, which is a big plus. So if you find that students often make the same mistake over and over again, maybe formatting their works cited page, you could save up a bank of comments within that grading guide, within that assignment, so that you aren't having to type out the same comment over and over and over again. The FTC can provide assistance in setting up the grading rubrics and grading guides so that you can implement these in your course for the summer. So the last strategy, the last strategy that we're going to recommend is for you to create a communication strategy of your own. So like I said, with the feedback, it's very, very important to be proactive about communicating and engaging with your students, even more than you normally would in a 15-week course. So there's a few different ways that you can do this. We recommend sending at least once weekly course updates or reminder emails, or posting to an announcements forum. The announcements forum in Moodle creates a centralized place where you can post these course updates. It sends an email notification to the student's MyLSU account, but also archives the previous emails that you've sent out. So a student can go back and review, you know, maybe an email you sent earlier in the week or last week about what's coming up. We also recommend creating either a Q&A forum in your course where students can ask questions that would benefit the entire class, and you monitor that forum on a daily basis and answer those questions and provide those for students. Or creating a space for frequently asked questions. So this could be where you give links to different resources that might be helpful in them completing their homework. Maybe even, especially in this 5-week term, providing links to the Center for Academic Success so students can set up tutoring appointments, or if they need that extra one-on-one support, there are other entities on campus that will help them get that support through tutoring. Then office hours, again, this is something that a face-to-face instructor would hold in their office, but you can also hold these in Zoom or Teams. And if you have your settings set up correctly, it won't be, a lot of people worry about multiple students showing up at the same time. But if you make an appointment with the FTC or even call them, they can help you set it up to where you have a waiting room for your office hour appointment, so you can see students individually and work through the questions that they have. And then whenever you've sort of wrapped up a module or maybe wrapped up a class activity, it's always good to send a follow-up email, maybe just summarizing the major points that were addressed, or highlighting some exemplar submissions of other students, so that everyone can move on to the next topic on the same page, and being able to pull out those salient points that are connected to those course learning outcomes. So again, communication strategy, this can be applied to any course, but remember, it's especially important in an accelerated term. So in closing, the strategies that we've covered today, we recommend that you utilize an alignment map to inventory your course. This will allow you to take stock of your major course components and prioritize the essentials. Organize by topic instead of week, and organize those into modules. So instead of thinking in terms of weeks and days, reset your perspective of the course in terms of the skills that you want students to master and the topics that you need to cover in order for them to master those skills, and then reorganize the course accordingly into modules. Use your course outcomes to retain only the essential activities and assessments, and focus on the delivery of your core content. So doing that alignment mapping activity will help you design, plan, and teach more effectively just overall, and help you winnow out maybe those things that are relevant, but they aren't in service of those course outcomes. And that's something that you could take into your 15-week course afterwards, that if it's not an essential, if it's not in service of the course outcomes, it may not be necessary to cover, even though, it may be one of your own research interests, maybe something that some students may get some enjoyment out of. Maybe consider making it as a supplementary resource for the course. Be proactive with your communication and engagement with students. Have a communication strategy. Give regular updates. If things change, God forbid, we have a hurricane day, you can also be flexible, build in flexibility by using that modular format. And then one thing that I want to leave you all with is, changing your course to this 5-week term is gonna, create some challenges, is gonna make you sort of pivot and rethink the way that you deliver your course. And what I would encourage you to do is only make a few large changes across your course to begin with. Make notes throughout the course about what students are getting, what they're not getting, what things could be changed, and then get student feedback from your evaluations and incorporate that into what you do for the next offering of the course. For some of you, you may be turning it around and teaching it in the adjacent 5-week term, and that's going to be tough, but making a few large scale changes, seeing how students do with it, reflecting on it, and then implementing more changes for the next offering. So before I turn it over to questions and next steps, I do want to plug our faculty support services resources that we provide. Our faculty support website is linked there. There are so many great resources. We have stuff for course design and development. We have recordings of previous webinars, trainings, upcoming trainings that we have. We also have places where you can schedule your appointment with either your FTC in residence. So that's going to be help with Moodle, setting up assignments in Moodle, editing in Moodle, or with your designer in residence. That's, rethinking different ways to present your course content, alignment, things of that nature. You can see I'm assigned to the E.J. Orso College of Business, so faculty can go there and sign up for an appointment with me or with my colleague Roland for the FTC in residence. We're also beginning what we call hypercare on April 12th, where we will be sitting, one of us will be sitting in a Zoom room, and you can walk in for assistance with course design and development, Moodle help, anything that you need, and that's beginning April 12th. The Faculty Technology Center, as always, is available to answer questions about Moodle or other LSU-supported technology. The email is there, the number is there. They also offer Zoom walk-in assistance Monday through Friday from, what is it, 2 to 4 p.m.? Yeah, 2 to 4 p.m. That is also available on our faculty support website. So with all of that being said, we plan on sending a follow-up email with all of the resources that we discussed today, a copy of this PowerPoint, and we'll also provide a recording of this workshop should you want to, relive this experience again or send it out to your colleagues that might find it helpful. But it's time for questions. What do we got? Do we have anything in the chat?
Where do we get access to the workload estimator?
We'll send it out in a follow-up email. We'll have the link. I believe Megan also provided a link in the chat if you want to look at it right now.
Okay.
You may have to scroll a little bit.
I just sent it again.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else? Any questions? Are we feeling better about the summer, worse about the summer, about the same?
Anybody have a good introductory message to students to tell them, get ready?
Hold on to your hats.
Hold on to more than that, strap in.
Yeah.
Actually,
I mean,
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Will.
Well, I was going to ask you, this is not building on Warren's question. It was something that I was wondering about that I don't know if we discussed regarding contacting students before the class begins. I feel like I read a note about that somewhere, about whether that would be a good, I guess suggesting that it was a good idea, but I can't remember what it said, and I'm not sure we discussed it here. Do you have anything to say about that?
At least in my experience, whenever I send out information to students before the class term starts, I always keep in mind that the roster may change significantly. So there's going to be some students who don't get that messaging early on if they add the class late. So that's why using that announcements feature in Moodle can be helpful, because it'll archive previous announcements to students who add the course late. And then also just, maybe even sending a message to those students who do add after the first day of class and just saying, hey, if you have any questions, be sure to check the announcements that I've sent out previously or send me an email.
You could also,
I think it's good to do it a week beforehand.
Yeah, in addition to sending the email with that information, there's nothing stopping you from making the course available to those students a couple of days in advance as well. So if students, when they do register, if they have immediate access, they can start getting to know your syllabus and getting to know the structure and things like that before the official term of the start. You can't really require students to do that before the official start day. So again, having that communication and reaching out to those people who may join late is really, really important. But anything that you can archive inside the course is going to be helpful for students.
How far in advance can you make it available? Because the biggest challenge in our classes are making them get the textbook before the second week of class, which means in this case, they've really missed 3 weeks, 4 weeks of class.
In that case, we do recommend that you send out like a welcome email or an info email up to 2 weeks ahead of term, like before it starts. And in that case, you can have a copy of the syllabus, a copy of the study plan. And if you are using a daily schedule in the course with all those due dates, communicate that information as early as possible. So that way they're ready to go day one.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's what we do recommend, because the roster typically becomes available about 2 weeks before the start of term.
Thank you very much for all those answers. That's helpful to think about.
And more into, maybe a creative way. I know that there is a animated virtual background of maybe a roller coaster. And so if you were recording like a welcome email, you could have, strap on, we are about to go on this ride together of this accelerated 5-week course.
The roller coaster and acceleration is apropos, because
There you
the
go.
cover of their textbook is a roller coaster, and it's all about the physics and the acceleration.
There you go. Anything else?
This is really great and very helpful. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I want a version next week that's cut down to the 2 minutes you promised.
Okay.
At the beginning.
We'll do a supercut of
That's
of the
about-
most important things.
That's an example of doing this with your classwork. Now you take this 1 hour and cut it down to 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's gonna
Well, it
be
would be
a
20
picture of the
minutes.
one
Well,
sheeter.
Right. Maybe
No.
with the Benny Hill theme in the background.
That'll work. All right, thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
This was very helpful.
And good luck to the rest of you.
Yeah, good
Thank
luck.
Yeah, to you too.